I talked to an AI chatbot about lucid dreaming, and it gave mostly rational information. I had to check if I was dreaming because I can't believe I'm saying this so soon. For those of you who don't know, the topic of lucid dreaming can be quite a toxic subject to research online, unless you're specifically looking for reliable, rational sources, but most of what tends to be found online is misinformation. For accurate information on lucid dreaming, I highly recommend the resource thelucidguide.com. It's run by a guy named Daniel Love, and he also runs a YouTube channel called Lucid Dream Portal. I consider this a top-notch resource on lucid dreaming. Daniel's a professional sleep and dream researcher who teaches a no-nonsense approach to lucid dreaming. For those of you who don't know, the chatbot I talked to is called ChatGPT, which is a new chatbot that recently got released for the public to use. I talked to it about lucid dreaming stuff, and it gave mostly rational information. By the way, hey everyone, Joe here. Let's see if ChatGPT can avoid common lucid dreaming misinformation in this video. I will be doing a more in-depth analysis on ChatGPT soon, which you should be able to find on my video excerpts playlist when that comes out. I will also add a link in the video notes below, as well as the eye in the top right. So stay tuned for that if you want a more in-depth analysis on ChatGPT later on. But before that, I'm going to give some examples of some of the things that this chatbot said and sort of why I want to investigate this. If you want to just jump right to the misinformation stuff, you can skip right to here, or else there should be navigation stuff below. Just a quick warning, take everything you see in this video with a grain of salt because the field of lucid dreaming is hardly researched, and we're talking to an AI chatbot that's not an expert in lucid dreaming, so take everything that's said with a grain of salt since there's a lot of unknowns in this subject. Alright, let's just jump right in now. So I'm going to give some examples of things that the chatbot said. So I want you to remember that humans did not say this. Artificial intelligence did. So the first thing is sort of about lucid dreaming in general that I thought was interesting. So I'm just going to give some quick examples like I said. So on this first one it says, overall, there is no guarantee that you'll be able to become lucid in every non-lucid dream you have. However, by using techniques such as reality checking and dream journaling, you can increase your chances of becoming lucid in a dream and gain control over the dream environment and events. It may also be helpful to experiment with different techniques and see what works best for you. Yeah, artificial intelligence said that. I can't believe that it actually said something that's quite rational, and it said define different techniques that work for you. That is one of the big ultimate things in the field of lucid dreaming since there are so many unknowns. What I find interesting about this chatbot is how confident it is in its answers, yet it still basically uses research and even acknowledges some limitations that are out there, which is why I want to see how it handles misinformation. So in this other example, I did kind of blur some stuff out just because the rest of the stuff may require a fair bit of context to understand what's going on, and it also kind of sways away from the main point of this video, so I'm just highlighting noteworthy stuff here. So towards the end of this one, you can see that it says, it may also be helpful to seek advice from others who have experience with lucid dreaming and dream control, as they may have additional tips and techniques that may help. Yeah, artificial intelligence said that. It's recommending people like Daniel Love, who, that would be a great example of what this is saying, so I know, this is crazy. Another thing that it said was, in addition to these strategies, it may also be helpful to experiment with different techniques and see what works best for you. Every person is different, and what works for one person may not work for another. It may take some practice and experimentation to find the strategies that work best for you. Yeah, honestly, I was not expecting artificial intelligence to have such rational information compared to the rest of the internet. This sounds crazy, but I would almost trust this more than internet sources, even though it is artificial intelligence. Obviously, be cautious and mindful about what you're doing with artificial intelligence, but yeah, I think as long as you're being mindful with what you're looking at rational, reliable sources, you should be fine. Anyway, I'll give some more examples now. The last sentence of this particular example is, every person is different and what works for one person may not work for another. I already kind of went over this, but I find it so refreshing to see artificial intelligence give these types of suggestions, to be honest. So in this next example, overall, the experience of dreaming is a complex and poorly understood process, and there's still much that researchers do not know about the way the brain generates and processes dreams. That's one of my favorite parts about how artificial intelligence can just acknowledge scientific limitations, as we all should be doing, rather than drawing these potential conclusions that may end up being harmful, especially if they're wrong. So the last paragraph of this particular thing says, overall, the ability to control dreams or lucid dreaming. It's kind of strange that I put that in quotes like that, but the rest of what it said, I liked. That's a complex and poorly understood process, and it's not clear exactly how or why some people are able to achieve it with more regularity than others. If you're interested in learning more about lucid dreaming and trying to develop your own dream control skills, it may be helpful to research and experiment with different techniques to find what works best for you. Yeah, this is honestly pretty crazy. I had to check if I was dreaming multiple times to see if this was really happening or not. This isn't even a human saying that. It's AI trained on a large language model as well as a bunch of information. But it's crazy that it's able to decipher better stuff than most of what you find online. So this next thing says, however, it is important to note that the experience of dreaming and the way the brain generates and processes dreams is a complex and poorly understood process, and there's still much that researchers do not know about the underlying mechanisms of REM atonia. Further research is needed to fully understand the role of REM atonia in the sleep and dreaming process. Yeah, it's just pretty crazy. I think I'm going to power through some of these because I have a lot of different screenshots and it's going to take a while to go through everything. But in this case, I was asking about, is muscle atonia really about, like, is it really so that we don't act out our dreams and stuff like that? And it basically said that's the most likely explanation, but it's the most widely accepted explanation thus far, but there could be other explanations too. That's what the chatbot said. Right here it says, without more information, it's difficult to say for certain what's causing this sensation. So yeah, it's acknowledging limitations of information rather than trying to act like a know-it-all. So that's pretty cool. And then this particular sentence also says, it may be worth discussing your experiences with a healthcare professional or a sleep specialist. Yeah, so that's what I mean when I say that the AI is giving generally good advice. So rather than saying, like, do this crazy thing, talk with a medical professional. It actually gives pretty safe advice overall, in my experience so far with this. So I thought that was really cool. In this particular message, I basically talked about how I have a curiosity for this subject, and I thought it was interesting what it said in response to that. So it says, I understand your curiosity about the experience of dreaming and the various sensations and phenomena that occur during the dreaming state. Dreams can be a source of fascination and inspiration for many people, and they can provide a unique and valuable window into the inner workings of the mind. That is a really good reason to explore lucid dreaming, by the way, and the chatbot even agrees on that. Then it says, if you're interested in learning more about dreaming and the various theories and research that have been conducted on this topic, there are many resources available that can provide additional information and insights. He even recommended books, which I found pretty insane. Some books on the topic that you might find interesting include The Interpretation of Dreams by Sigmund Freud, The Science of Dreams by Eric Sullivan, and The Lucid Dreaming Handbook by Tony Crisp. Someone fact check if these are actually good resources on lucid dreaming or not. I don't know these books. Then it says, additionally, there are many online resources, articles, and forums that can provide information and support for those interested in exploring the world of lucid dreaming. Now, that last sentence is where you have to be careful. That is true, but you kind of have to be careful what you browse and just make sure everything is rational and accurate and engages logic and critical thinking. I think those are pretty good general rules when it comes to that. So this next thing says, overall, the experience of dreaming is a complex and poorly understood process, and there is still much that researchers do not know about the way that the brain generates and processes dreams. Without more information, it's difficult to say for certain what's causing the sensations you describe. I feel like I already went over a screenshot like this. I didn't take a whole lot of time to put these screenshots together, and they're in no particular order, by the way. I'm just showing what I think is interesting that it covered. So this next thing I thought was interesting was, it's not uncommon for the underlying cause of this particular thing to be unknown. So it did speculate stuff. And by the way, huge disclaimer, a lot of the stuff that you see here is mostly speculation. So that's why you take a lot of stuff here with a grain of salt. But yeah, even the AI chatbot said that the cause of something may be unknown, and that's not unusual. I wish more people would have that sort of attitude with certain things where that is the case. Okay, so this is an interesting topic where the AI chatbot actually contradicted itself based on something that I said. So remember how I said that it tends to be confident with what it's saying? Well, here's a situation where it confidently contradicted itself and possibly had no idea. So here I was talking about how I tend to personally notice that dreams are more intense at the beginning of the night, and then they become less intense as the night progresses. So in response to that, it says, research has shown that the intensity of dreams tends to increase as the night progresses and more REM sleep is experienced. Therefore, it's possible that the same dream may feel more intense and emotional if it occurs later in the night when more REM sleep has taken place. As I said, for me, it kind of tends to be the opposite of what it says here. So I kind of explained that, and then in this statement, it actually contradicts itself. And says, as mentioned earlier, the intensity of dreams tends to increase as the night progresses and more REM sleep is experienced. And then when it says therefore, it says the exact opposite of that, which makes no sense. So here it said, therefore, it's possible that the same dream may feel more intense if it occurs earlier in the night, when before it said later, in the same statement basically. So therefore, it tends to feel more intense if it occurs earlier in the night when less REM sleep is taking place. Earlier, it said the exact opposite, where if it occurs later in the night when more REM sleep is taking place. And then it says less intense if it occurs later in the night when more REM sleep has occurred. So this is an example of where the chatbot actually contradicted itself, which I thought was quite interesting. I don't really know what conclusion to draw, as there's probably not a whole lot of research on that particular thing, but I thought this was interesting to note regardless. And then right here, I asked a pretty thorough question, and it started off by saying there is no one-size-fits-all answer to this question, as people can have different experiences with different techniques. I applauded for how it answered right there. Then it gave some possible theories of what I was talking about. And then in the end, it said, ultimately, the most important thing is to find a technique that works best for you, that you enjoy. Honestly, I applauded for the way it answered that, especially with those particular statements. And then I also decided to ask it if I'm dreaming. The short answer is that's something you have to figure out for yourself. No one can tell you whether you're dreaming or not. You have to find that for yourself if you're into lucid dreaming stuff. Anyway, I decided to ask the AI bot that, and I'm proud of what it said. It said, as an AI, I am not able to determine whether you are currently dreaming or not. And it basically said you need to figure that out for yourself. So, this is crazy. And then here's the statement that it said about lucid dreaming in general. So this said, there are a variety of techniques that people use to try to induce lucid dreams, including reality testing, such as trying to read text in a dream as the words become distorted or change in a dream state, So far, so good. Setting intention before falling asleep, such as telling oneself, I will become aware that I'm dreaming. I kind of applauded for that too. It said setting intention rather than repeating a mantra. You're literally setting an intention right there. That's a thing that's hugely misunderstood. And then it says, and using external stimuli, such as using special devices that flash lights or play sounds during the night. As far as that goes, I'm not proud that it said that particular thing, because you don't want to rely on external sources. This is something where you'll get the most benefit long term by building the mental muscles and not relying on external stimuli. You don't want to offload that and become lazy with it. So there's something that, yeah, most of the things that said are good, but that's something that it probably could improve on. Then it said, it's important to note that while some people are able to experience lucid dreams with some regularity, the ability to have lucid dreams can vary widely from person to person and may not be possible for everyone. So far, that's a really accurate statement, at least with what we know. It can take some time to practice and develop the skills needed to have lucid dreams. There are no shortcuts when it comes to this, so this basically implied that, so I applaud it once again. And then I thought it was interesting how right here it said, while I do not have the personal experience with lucid dreaming, there are some techniques that people use for blah blah blah. And then on the bottom it said, it's important to remember that lucid dreaming is not a precise science and different techniques work differently for different people. If you're interested in trying lucid dreaming, it may be helpful to do some research and experiment with different techniques to find what works best for you. Very good advice right there, so I applaud it once again for giving mostly sensible information. It's kind of surprising that a chatbot can have more sensible information than the general internet. It's amazing that it can get around that, especially since it's just a large machine learning model. So right here, I talked about dream recall stuff in general, and in response, it said, sometimes our brains can resist our attempts to remember, which can make it difficult to recall specific details. I often run into that myself, but I'm sure a lot of you have as well. Then it said, that's why it's often helpful to take a more relaxed approach and simply allow memories to come back on their own. I definitely noticed that tends to happen personally. The moment I stop trying, oftentimes a memory will suddenly come to me. Anyway, then it said, I'm glad to hear that you're using dream journaling as a way to remember your dreams. Yeah, AI is glad about something that I do. That's pretty cool. It can be a really useful technique for increasing our awareness of our unconscious mind and for better understanding the messages and symbols in our dreams. Yes, that's a very good reason to dream journal, as it says. Good luck with your dream journaling, and don't hesitate to reach out if you have other questions. Wow, that is crazy how human-friendly this AI chatbot actually is. It can also generate programming code, which I think is absolutely insane. As I said, I will be releasing a video excerpt of this soon, so feel free to check that out if you want a more in-depth analysis on ChatGPT when that comes out. And then right here, I talked about how the digital clock test tends to not be that reliable for me, but I tend to have a lot more reliability when testing analog clocks instead. So I asked the chatbot for possible theories on why that may be, and I thought it was interesting what it said. Ultimately, it comes down to finding what works best for you. But this is what the chatbot said in response to that. The digital clock test is a common technique used by people who practice lucid dreaming. The idea behind the test is that in a dream, the brain often has difficulty accurately reproducing details such as the time on a digital clock. As a result, when a person looks at a digital clock, looks away, and then looks back, the time on the clock may have changed or be difficult to read. This can serve as a clue that the person is dreaming, as the time on a real-life digital clock would not change in this way. Yeah, that's pretty accurate as far as I can tell. And then on the bottom it said, it's worth noting that the effectiveness of the digital clock test can vary from person to person and may not work for everyone, myself included for the most part. Some people may find that other techniques, such as looking for inconsistencies or impossible events in the dream environment, work better for them. It may be helpful to experiment with different techniques and see what works best for you. So that's pretty interesting how I responded to that. And in response to why the digital clock test doesn't work best for me, and remember, this is all speculation, the AI chatbot said, another possible reason is that your short-term memory may be better at recalling the time on a digital clock than the position of the hands on an analog clock. When you look at a digital clock and then look away, your short-term memory may be able to retain the time for a longer period of time on a digital clock, making it less likely to change when you look back. In contrast, the position of the hands on an analog clock may be more difficult for your short-term memory to retain, making it more likely to change when you look away and look back. I think that probably sounds right, especially considering how I tend to think of the time in terms of how you read it on a digital clock, and it's not really translatable to an analog clock. Even when I look at an analog clock, I think of it in terms of how you read it on a digital clock. So this is all speculation, but that's interesting how the AI is able to come up with reasoning like that. A little bit more information on that it gave. It says, since you are accustomed to thinking about time in terms of how it's displayed on the digital clock, it may be easier for your brain to reproduce the time on a digital clock than the position of hands on an analog clock. This would make it less likely for the time on a digital clock to change when you look away and look back, while the position of the hands on an analog clock may be more likely to change. Another factor that could play a role is the amount of information that the brain has to process in order to reproduce the time on a digital clock versus the position of the hands on an analog clock. The time on a digital clock is typically displayed as a series of digits, each of which has a specific position on the clock face. The brain may have to process and reproduce this complex arrangement of digits in order to accurately reproduce the time. In contrast, the position of the hands on an analog clock is typically represented by a single continuous line, which may be easier for the brain to reproduce. This could make it more likely for the position of the hands on an analog clock to change when you look away and look back. And then I also applauded for saying, it is worth noting that these are just theories, and the exact reasons for why you find analog clocks to be more reliable for the digital clock test may vary from person to person. So it even said that this is all speculation, which I thought was very cool. Last one, I promise. In this one, I talked about how technology tends to be very accurately reproduced in my dreams compared to most people. And I asked it for theories on why that may be. And it answered by saying, in your case, it seems that the technology in your lucid dreams tends to be reproduced fairly accurately. This could be due to a variety of factors, such as your familiarity with technology and the amount of detail you pay attention to when using technology in your waking life. For example, if you're someone who's very familiar with technology and pays close attention to the details of how technology works, your brain may be better able to reproduce the technology accurately in your lucid dreams. That does sound like a very likely explanation because I do have a huge passion for technology, even more so than lucid dreaming. Anyway, in contrast, other people may not be as familiar with technology or may not pay as much attention to the details of how it works, which could explain why the technology in their lucid dreams may not be reproduced accurately. Additionally, the brain may have difficulty accurately reproducing complex or unfamiliar objects or events in a lucid dream, which could also explain why the technology in some people's lucid dreams may not be reproduced accurately. Overall, the accuracy of the technology in a person's lucid dream can vary greatly depending on a variety of factors, such as familiarity with technology and the amount of detail they pay attention to. It's important to remember that lucid dreaming is not a precise science, and the accuracy of the dream environment and events can vary from person to person. Wow. Just wow. The way it's able to basically piece everything together and draw conclusions like this while also trying to acknowledge how things vary from person to person is just insane to me. Anyway, let's actually try the ChatGPT now and see if it can battle common lucid dream misinformation. So to sum up some of the things I like about the chatbot, it's capable of giving warnings and indicating if something is dangerous. It recommends talking to a medical professional and that sort of thing. It tends to break things down in an easy to understand way and talks about studies within the field if there are any that it could reference. It also says that it may not be possible to attribute things to just one factor, as there could be a multitude of variables involved. I also like how it mentioned that the term lucid dreaming is a widely known term in the field of psychology. Alright, let's try out ChatGPT for once now. So I'm probably not going to remember to cover everything since there is so much possible misinformation stuff I could cover. But I'll try my best for my coverage regarding this. And of course, remember to take everything that's on here with a grain of salt. And this is freely available for you guys to try if I may have missed anything. And by the way, if anything interesting happens when you try it, feel free to let us know down in the comments. So let's just jump right in. So lucid dreaming is a skill that you typically have to learn. And it's not like you could just do it overnight. I mean, you may have beginner's luck in some situations, but it's one of those things that takes time and unfortunately doesn't happen every night given all the variables that are involved. But I'm gonna see if I can answer how to lucid dream tonight easily, or if I could get around the common misinformation revolving around that. So let's give it a shot, shall we? How can I easily lucid dream tonight? Easy. I want to see what it says in response to that. Oh my gosh. Oh wow, look at that. There are a few techniques you can try to increase your chances of having a lucid dream tonight. See, it's not guaranteeing that lucid dream will happen tonight. It's just saying that there's stuff you can do to increase your chances of having a lucid dream. Nice. Keep a dream journal, reality check. Those are good pieces of advice in general. Set an intention before bed. Choose a vivid dream setting. That's interesting. And then it says, remember, it may take some time to practice to have a lucid dream, so don't get discouraged if you don't have one right away. Keep trying different techniques and you may eventually have a lucid dream. I didn't think it would actually answer in such a rational way. Now let's see if I can say, what is a guaranteed way to have a lucid dream tonight? Oh, nice. It's not possible to guarantee you'll have a lucid dream tonight or any other night. Lucid dreaming is a state of consciousness in which a person becomes aware that they're dreaming while they're still in the dream. It's a skill that can be developed through practice, but it's not something that can be guaranteed or controlled. Amazing. There are a few techniques that can increase your chances of having a lucid dream. Basically the steps that it just listed before. Wow, I'm impressed so far. Amazing answers. Now I'm going to see if it has any ways to lucid dream every night, which is none of that's guaranteed as we covered before, but I want to see if it can be arrogant and stuff like that. So, what is a guaranteed way to lucid dream every night? Nice. Not possible to guarantee you'll have a lucid dream every night. Amazing. There's probably some online resources that say that you are guaranteed to have a lucid dream every night, but that's a red flag in general, so don't listen to the sources that say it's not guaranteed. But I'm proud of how this thing's answered so far. I was going to ask it how to increase the odds of lucid dreaming, but I feel like it kind of already answered that. So instead, I'm going to ask it what the best lucid dreaming technique is. Spoiler alert, there's not. You want to do what's best for a given moment and what works for you, etc. What is the best lucid dreaming technique? There are many techniques to induce. Some vary from person to person. Reality checks. It had the abbreviation for mild, correct? It had the abbreviation for wild, correct, too. Well, it kind of considers wild the technique, but At least it had the abbreviation correct, and it technically said the correct thing, because you are staying awake as you transition into a lucid dream. Mild involves setting an intention before you fall asleep. Yeah, I mean, there's obviously a little more to it than that, but that's definitely better. Oh boy. Try to avoid supplements in general. Amazing response overall, if you ask me. Spencer got the abbreviation right, and it got things right in general. So now I'm going to ask it about the IELTS that are common, like wild, dialed, and mild, and see how it handles those things. Some people talk about wild as being a technique, and there's these defined steps. It's really a way to have a lucid dream, and there's a lot of wild induction techniques, but wild itself is not really a technique. I'm not really going to go over all that right now, but let's see how this answers it. So, how do I perform the wild lucid dreaming technique? Got the abbreviation right, which is pretty cool. Let's see if this is real. Find a time you're naturally tired. Ideally, you want to do a time when you're close to REM sleep, which this thing's being a little bit too abstract regarding that. Find a comfortable position. I mean, you'll probably already be in bed when you do this. Now it talks about focusing on breathing. Okay, there's where it's wrong. So you could do various wild induction techniques like the impossible movement practice. Just look up Daniel Love's resource on that. Or dream walker, dream stumbler. There's a whole bunch of different wild techniques. I like catch the butterfly personally. Yeah, I don't think a lot of these are correct. Just look at Daniel Love's wild techniques, or just wild induction techniques in general, like the impossible movement practice. You'll see how that's very different from what a lot of this says. I want to see what it says in response to, isn't it more like a type of lucid dream rather than a technique? And what's really cool is it can actually piece together context. Oh, look at that. It can piece together context based on what was just said. And it says you are correct. Yeah, this is where it's getting a little bit hung up on the actual terminology. It's not really defining it in the way you'd hope it would. Because wild is more of a type of lucid dream where you maintain your awareness rather than considering it a technique. I rephrased my question and it said that wild is a type of lucid dream where they're transitioning from the waking state to the dream state rather than when they've already entered the dream. And then it even mentioned how wild technique can be confusing as it refers to a method of inducing a wake-initiated lucid dream and a type of lucid dream itself. Man, I'm really confusing myself with terminology here. Be it used to using terms like maintained logic or regained logic for dials. But we'll get to that in a second. This last sentence I thought was a little bit weird. It may be helpful to think of the wild technique as the specific method for inducing a wild rather than a type of lucid dream. I'm a little confused. I don't even know if this is the right way to think about anything or not. I'm a little confused with this terminology here. I usually don't get confused with terminology because there's a lot of computer terminology that has tons of abbreviations, so I'm very used to abbreviations, but here I don't even feel like I'm piecing together everything correctly. You know, maybe this is correct because wake-initiated lucid dream is the type of lucid dream, but the technique is a way to have or induce a wake-initiated lucid dream. So wild technique itself isn't a type. See, I'm still confusing myself. I think we should move on rather than confusing terminology and acronyms. Let's see how it answers the dialed now. At least it had that abbreviation right too, after they've already entered the dream. That's correct so far. To increase the chances of having it dialed. Keeping a dream journal, reality checking, setting an intention, choosing a vivid dream setting probably helps. Staying hydrated could probably help with clarity and stuff. And this is really good advice down here. So I would say this is mostly good advice overall. Now I'm going to ask it how to do the filed technique, which isn't really much of a valid technique. It's something that randomly appeared on a forum one day. It's more like you focus on something. Now, like, look at how absurd this is. So it talks about filed. It even knows about filed, which is quite shocking. What you're really trying to do is you're trying to focus on something as you fall into a dream with wake initiated lucid dream of maintained logic, as we should be calling it these days. So important things to note with this is only going to work if you're really close to REM. This is being a little bit too arbitrary with the timing. This is honestly just really a focal point for inducing a maintained awareness or maintained logic lucid dream. This is one that I would honestly ignore. Let's see if it can accurately give the steps for the mild technique, which was an official technique by Stephen LaBerge. These are definitely wrong steps, I think. Yeah, this is definitely not correct. Repeat a mantra. The steps by Stephen LaBerge, who actually coined the term, is quite a bit different from what this is saying, so it can't get around this lucid dream misinformation, which I wouldn't really expect it to. But let's see if it can get the origins of mild correct. Who invented mild? Okay, I would assume that's correct right there. Amazingly, it has the author correct, but not the steps. That is quite shocking. Now let's move on to another common misconception of astral projection. I want to see if this thing thinks that astral projection is real. And see if it can handle that. It's not scientifically recognized. It's not considered to be a reliable or reproducible phenomenon by the scientific community. It should be approached with caution and skepticism. Amazing. I'm going to ask it if I should try astral projection. It's up to you. But it's important to understand that it's a belief and it's not scientifically recognized. Good advice. Listen to this rather than the internet, honestly. I want to see if it's a waste of time. Curious to see how it answered that. I pretty much answered it the same way as it did with the first question. And on that subject, let's ask about reality shifting. Interesting how it knows about that. No scientific evidence to support this idea either. It's not scientifically accepted and should be approached with caution. Amazing response once again. Now let's go over some common reality tests that are known to be unreliable, like particularly dream control tests. So these are tests where they can work, like the finger through palm, but they require dream control and they have that chance of not working. Therefore, it might be best to avoid them. So let's ask about finger through palm. See if it even knows what I'm talking about with this phrasing. So it gives some steps like you'd expect. It reminds us that it's an illusion and it shouldn't be taken as a magical. So it goes over the steps and then it reminds us that it's an illusion. Now let's see if it thinks it's reliable or not. Oh, nice. Oh, wait a minute. I don't think it understands that I'm talking about a reality test. I think I gotta clarify that I'm talking about reality testing. It thinks that it's just the illusion of it. I didn't even piece together at first that it might not have understood the context. So let me rephrase that. Okay, these are more like the actual steps of finger through palm. Now I'm going to ask if the actual dreaming reality test is reliable or not. Nice. It says that it's a fun trick, but it should not be relied upon for determining the state of consciousness. And basically it's saying that it's not a reliable reality test if you really look at what this is saying. So now what about jumping in the air? The idea with the jumping in the air, from my understanding, I've never actually done this before, but you jump in a dream and if you slowly float back down, then I think you're dreaming. But I've had dreams where I do tend to have much lower gravity in the dream than waking life, so just jumping in general and noticing lower gravity is more of a dream sign for me than a reality test. And it's also saying it's not scientifically recognized and it's not definitive for determining the state of consciousness, since it could be completely normal in a dream too, and it should not be relied upon. Now let's ask how to do counting fingers and see if it says anything about reliability. So now this will happen every once in a while. It'll glitch out, but I'm just gonna refresh the page and that tends to work fine. So I'm gonna give it some context now. Since I refreshed it, it lost all the context of what we previously did. So I'm making sure it has enough context to answer the question now. So this is another reality test that can be known for not being reliable, although it does work for some people. Most of the time I tend to have my normal amount of fingers when I'm counting. So it gives the steps and then it says that the test is not foolproof and may produce false negatives, so that's good. Now I'm going to ask it and see if it's reliable. It basically says it's not a foolproof method and can produce false negatives. I don't use it myself. I often find that sometimes I will have multiple fingers when I'm not even trying to reality test, so I use that also as more of a dream sign, just like with the jumping. I mean, one time I had a dream where some other dream character had 8 fingers and that was an obvious giveaway. How about jumping out the window to test if it's a dream? Obviously that's not very safe. I just want to see how this responds to that. It's not safe or a reliable way. It could have serious consequences in the waking world. Amazing. It's best to do reality tests that do not involve potentially dangerous actions. Some examples involve a nose pinch test. That's really good advice. I want to see if it understands why the nose pinch test is reliable. Good explanation so far. In the waking world, you won't be able to breathe, but in a dream, you may be able to breathe even if it's pinched. And it's reliable because it's difficult to replicate the sensation of not being able to breathe through it. But of course, as with any test, it's somewhat foolproof. It's somewhat not foolproof, and it can sometimes produce false negatives, but that's how it is with any test, which is why you might do multiple tests. I have an idea. What does a reality test consist of for dreaming? I want to see if it gives a good explanation for that. Determines whether you're in a dream or the... Hopefully it's not frozen. Is this a reason to reality test? Is this thing testing me right now? Okay, it froze up, so I did it again. By the way, I just did a reality test. I'm not dreaming, but you guys really should see if you are for yourself. So those are good examples of reality tests. The sensations, stability, passage of time, which can be very different. Inconsistencies in general. Reality tests for dreaming are not always foolproof, and it's possible to have false awakenings. Should a reality test consist of more than one test? Yep. So this thing's talking about multiple tests, but it didn't really mention that unless I kind of push it to. So that's kind of interesting. I wasn't originally going to ask this, but how can false awakenings be prevented? Wow, that started responding quickly. Keeping a dream journal? Well, I suppose it could increase the odds of recognizing false awakenings to some extent, but having a good reality test practice should get the job done, I would think. Establish a regular sleep schedule. That helps prevent false awakenings. Relaxing also helps. Oh my god. That's crazy. Overall, I think these are pretty good steps to minimize the risk of a false awakening. Okay, so I'm not going to cover some of the tests that aren't known to be reliable, like the optical reality check, which is one of my favorite ones to do personally. But I will move on to binaural beats now. So I'm just going to ask it for recommendations. What binaural beats would you recommend for lucid dreaming? Binaural beats are pretty much what this explained. Sounds that can be created with two different frequencies to the left and right ears. Somehow that affects the brain activity by interpreting what's in between. Some evidence that suggests it may be effective. I think it's very limited to even consider trying it. Should be cautious about whether or not to do it. I've tried it. I've had no luck. You're probably going to lose a bunch of time doing that. Speak with a healthcare professional before starting binaural beats. Before listening to a sound. Hey, can I listen to my favorite song? Is it safe to do so? But, yeah. I mean, it's probably going to be a waste of time. Don't offload stuff to binaural beats. Is it worth using binaural beats for lucid dreaming? It's not well understood. It's important to be cautious. Yeah, I suppose relying on binaural beats, yeah, that could probably make things worse, actually. I definitely noticed for me, if anything, it was making it harder to sleep. So, I don't like using it at all. I think in general, it's probably good to avoid it altogether. I think it's probably better to avoid it overall in general. It's probably worth more value to have a proper lucid dreaming practice where you don't rely on external sources as well. On a similar topic, let's ask about devices would you recommend for lucid dreaming? Induction, flashing lights, binaural beats. The effectiveness is not well understood. Do your research before making a purchase. That's good advice. They're probably going to disrupt sleep more than anything, so I think I'd probably avoid it since there aren't really well-researched devices out there as it is. So the real answer is just avoid them. Have a proper lucid dreaming practice where you rely on the muscles of the mind rather than anything external. I'm going to ask it for what the best supplements are. Answer: probably avoid them at all costs. There's no scientific evidence. It's not well understood. Very important to be cautious for using supplements for any purpose at all. Shouldn't be a replacement for sleep hygiene. And it says speak with a healthcare professional. This should almost be an asterisk if it's possible, but I think this Chatbot can only do things in this one font and color and everything right now. It's recommending dream journals, reality testing, and good sleep schedule. I think the good sleep schedule is underrated. The one thing that tends to hold me back from lucid dreaming is not having a good sleep schedule at certain times. When I have a good sleep schedule, it tends to work pretty well overall. So I think that's something that's not looked at enough. And I think it should be one of the top things that is analyzed, getting the right amount of sleep. And of course, sleep hygiene in general should be prioritized over lucid dreaming. Lucid dreaming is more of a supplementary thing to sleep. It's not a primary thing, and no cost of sleep should be involved when it comes to lucid dreaming. Now let's see if we can get it to make any wild claims. So the first one I'm going to do is what happens when you look at mirrors in dreams. This is something you shouldn't listen to what other people say regarding this because it's heavily expectation based and it's pretty much just whatever you would expect. It should be normal if you don't really have any expectations, which should be the case. In some dreams it'll look consistent, in other dreams it may look distorted. I find that it varies a lot. Most of the time I tend to look normal, but one time I was wearing sunglasses in the dream and my reflection did not have sunglasses. It really depends on the dream. This is definitely better information than what you'll find on most online sources. The answer is it depends. It can be normal, it can be distorted, who knows. That can fluctuate with every experience. Another claim that's driven me absolutely crazy is people will be saying, like, don't close your eyes in a dream, otherwise you'll wake up. I can confirm that that's not the case. It really shouldn't do that. I mean, it can, but that's not guaranteed. I tend to find that it doesn't. I had a dream once where I was riding a wagon and I had my eyes closed for like 2 or 3 minutes straight, and when I opened them up I was still in the dream scene, so it really shouldn't matter. And I also tend to have my eyes closed when I use hydrokinesis like Percy Jackson in a dream, and I'm still in the same scene and absolutely nothing changed as far as I can tell. So it drives me bonkers when I hear these myths about closing the eyes in a dream, especially if you're engaged in the tactile element as well. Yeah, I think the real answer is it depends. This could happen, but the dream may also continue or the scene might shift in some way. And then this is probably talking about non-lucid dreams and what it might mean if you are closing your eyes in a dream. Sometimes it's just bound with the context and it doesn't cause a dream to necessarily fade or anything. It can get recreated visually when you open it up again. I think this thing probably does answer better than most of the internet as well. Now let's go over how to make lucid dreams last longer. Not bad. Engaging with the dream, that's really good advice. Maintaining focus, that's probably the thing that I tend to do the most. Practicing dream control, that pretty much just ties with the previous things. Regular sleep schedule. I certainly notice that if I'm sleeping light, then I might dip in and out of dreaming, but with normal sleep, then it tends to not happen. And of course, it says that the length varies greatly, and it says that it's not always possible to control that, so that's good that it says that. Now let's go over how to make lucid dreams more vivid. It kind of ties in with this first thing. We don't usually have control over that. It pretty much comes down to engaging with the dream, and see, it's answering in basically the same way as the previous question. And how vivid a dream is, a lot of times it's just a perception thing and the way you end up remembering it when you recall it. And yes, it says those strategies can help, but it's not always possible to control it. Yeah, I think that's a pretty good response overall. Now let's see how it responds to this. What should people do when they find themselves in a lucid dream? Answer, whatever they want. It's their dream world. Nobody should tell them what to do. I mean, they should probably make sure they're engaging logic. And yes, it depends on people's goals and preferences. That's a good way to answer that. Those are some examples of what people can do. It's a good idea to consider your own goals and preferences and explore it in a way that's meaningful and fulfilling to you. Amazing. That is exactly what should be done. Nobody should be telling you what to do in a dream. I want to see how it answers this question here. What would be a good term for wake-initiated lucid dream since it's an acronym that's not in plain English? Conscious dreaming or awake dreaming? Maintained awareness or maintained logic or other potential terms that could be used. Now I'm going to say, how about dialed? Let's see if I can piece together the context. What's a good plain English term for dialed? Regained logic or regained awareness? Because that's really what you're doing. With a while, you're maintaining your awareness or logic. With a dialed, you're regaining that, essentially. Spontaneous lucid dream. In dream, I've never heard in dream lucidity, but spontaneous can be somewhat of a misnomer, especially if you do have an overall lucid dreaming practice. It can be a result of that. Although if you have them naturally, then it can certainly feel like a spontaneous one. I suppose that could be somewhat subjective depending on the context. Now I'm going to ask for a plain English term for DILD, which stands for Dream Exit Induced Lucid Dream, which that's a mouthful, but what's really going on is you wake up from a dream and then you consciously re-enter whilst having lucidity maintained into that. Using the terminology for like maintained logic or regained logic, I like to call it DILD essentially a re-maintained logic, since it's sort of a hybrid of the two. Because you're consciously entering the dream, so awareness is maintained, but it's technically in the middle of a dream, so rather than it just being a maintained logic, it's like a regained maintained logic, or what I like to call a re-maintained logic. Transition lucid dream, I feel like that's a little bit confusing. Between dream lucidity, I guess that works, but I still feel like that's a little bit confusing. But again, lucid dream is what the ultimate goal is, so it's not really worth getting obsessed over the types like that in reality. Let's see if it can do one for mild plain English. Can that even be done? Setting intentions. You're really engaging perspective memory, which is like the ability to remember to do stuff in the future. And you're basically setting intentions. So let's see. Oh my, I forgot that it does this wrong. So yeah, it falls under the category of a lucid dream induction technique. Sure. Yeah, I think lucid dream or logic dream, whatever, is like a dream in which you're engaging logic. That would be a logic dream. Now let's go over some of the wild misconceptions, aka some of the maintained awareness or logic dreams, where you maintain awareness into the dream. So a misconception that I've fallen victim under before is that you have to lie still, which is absolutely not true. What you're really doing is allowing the process to begin. You just have to be focused on something that allows the dreaming process to begin. You're not trying to trick your body or mind into thinking that you're asleep. You're really just focusing on something that doesn't interfere with the natural process of sleep and dreaming kicking in. So I'm going to act as if lying still is something you have to do and see how it handles that. I don't know if it'll understand this wording, but how do I deal with lying still in a maintained logic attempt for lucid dreaming? Oh boy, there's misinformation right there. You don't have to lie still. You absolutely don't. So this can't handle that bit of misinformation, I guess. I mean, I've had instances where I was tossing and turning and all of a sudden the process started engaging, like in the middle of tossing and turning. So being focused on something that doesn't interfere with the natural process is really what's happening, not lying still and doing a trick. Let's see how it handles why lying still is required for wild induction. Answer, it's not required. If anything, it'll make it worse. You'll just probably create insomnia as a result. Lying still is recommended. It can help the dreamer avoid distractions. Well, if anything, I feel like it'd create more. Lying still would probably create more distractions. By not lying still, you just get comfortable and allow everything to fall into place. Now I'm going to ask a grand question. Is lying still required for wild induction? Oh, perfect. This is kind of a relief to see. It's recommended, but it's not necessary. Oh my gosh, some people find it easier to do it while lying still. Other people find it easier when engaging in physical activity. Oh my god. Somehow it's easier to do Fayed stuff. Somehow it's easier to do Fayed stuff to induce a wild. That is so messed up. But yes, this bit about experimentation is very useful advice. Find what works best for you. You know, now that I think about it, I have actually done a wild induction technique where I sort of visualize stuff from a tactile point, and I didn't entirely visualize. I actually did do a slight physical effort like this to some extent, move my legs mostly, and I did actually find that helpful for the maintained logic induction. So, and that is a physical effort, so I guess maybe it is helpful, especially if you're someone who tends to fall asleep too early. It might actually help you stay awake enough, and if you have the right focus, then you can probably still allow the dreaming process to engage. There's a chance that this probably isn't wrong. It really depends. This is another common misconception. How do I deal with the swallow reflex during wild induction? Answer: just swallow when you have to. It's not something you have to ignore. Swallow, toss and turn, whatever you need to do. Everything will eventually just fall into place, and ignoring these things and lying still is probably just going to make things worse. Swallow before attempting. You can do it during the attempt. It's not a big deal. These strategies really aren't necessary. If you get the urges, just do it. I mean, you'll probably find yourself focusing on something else that it really doesn't matter that much anyway. How do I deal with excitement during wild attempts? Meditation has been known to be helpful, but a strategy that I personally liked using is to just allow it to diminish with more attempts. Like, as I attempt more, the excitement will just diminish over time, and then that's probably what I did when I first started doing it, and that's why it hasn't been a problem for this amount of time, since I've been doing it quite a lot. So I'd say meditation and or just allowing it to diminish with more experiences and getting used to that. Sometimes I even find that just allowing it to be part of the experience itself rather than a distraction can be quite helpful too. And reminding myself that it's okay to fail. And even allowing myself to fail can sometimes take off the pressure and allow me to be successful as well during these attempts. But yeah, the thing that I find the most beneficial, like back when I used to struggle with actually waking up, not necessarily because of excitement, but just screwing up in one way or another and having the anticipation of screwing up, the thing that I found most helpful was just allowing the excitement, etc., to diminish over time as I have more experiences and just getting used to it. I find that quite a useful tool. So now I'm going to ask, is there such thing as non-REM dreams? I've heard of it, but I don't know if it's really scientifically proven or not. I just want to see how this responds to that, and whether that's accurate or not. Maybe there's such thing. I don't know if I would personally consider this as gospel, but I've certainly noticed that as I drift into sleep, my mind will do pretty weird things, and I'm sure it might have to do with this to some extent, maybe. I honestly don't know. Now let's go over a really common piece of misinformation. How do I induce sleep paralysis for lucid dreaming? You really don't need to. Some people get obsessed with doing that just because it can be turned into a lucid dream, but it's actually not necessary. And wild techniques don't necessarily have to lead to it. There's no safe or effective way to intentionally induce it for the purpose of lucid dreaming. And then it talks about sleep disorders, and there could be negative consequences, blah blah blah. And then it says there's much safer ways to do it. It even talks about wild. If wild had a strong association with sleep paralysis, I don't even think this would associate this as a safe alternative. Wild and sleep paralysis do not always correlate together. I think it kind of depends on the focal point. If you're immersed in some sort of visualization, you're probably not going to notice the natural process kicking in. And then it talks about qualified healthcare professionals, which is great advice as well, so I applaud it for that. Then I guess I'll rephrase it to, is sleep paralysis necessary for lucid dreaming? Perfect. Sleep paralysis is not necessary for lucid dreaming. It can occur during any stage of sleep, but including REM. I have actually had some non-REM lucid dreams as well. It was pretty weird because I didn't exactly have a dream body, but I felt like my thoughts kind of influenced my navigation throughout the experience. I thought it was quite fascinating. Anyway, that's not relevant to this. But I also applaud it for saying there's safer ways to induce it than to talk to qualified healthcare professional, things like that, if you're suffering from it and stuff like that. So now I guess related to that, I'll ask, what is the best way to deal with sleep paralysis when it is occurring? You really can just turn it into a lucid dream, or I think the biggest thing is to like not panic and just go with the flow. You can do like wild induction techniques if you really want to, or maintain logic techniques like the impossible movement practice, or else I like to just focus on my thoughts and then all of a sudden I stop noticing, like if it occurs. Then you start to realize how irrelevant it is. But of course you can hold your breath and things like that to wake up, but that's not really ideal. I wish that it talked about using it to turn it into a lucid dream. During the occasions that I've had it, I like to just focus on my thoughts and then all of a sudden I stop noticing it. Either I find myself in a dream or else I'm awake. Whatever, I don't know. Doesn't really matter. I want to see if it can answer how it can be turned into a lucid dream, because it can. It's not possible to intentionally turn it into a lucid dream. That is technically true. It can be turned into a lucid dream, but none of that is guaranteed. And then it talks about how most people react to it and how people might want to wake up from it and that sort of thing. I'm rephrasing that to, how can I turn sleep paralysis into a lucid dream if I just happen to find myself in an experience? I wouldn't say that this is necessarily true, although I can see how some people would potentially perceive that if they're not super familiar with that. And then the rest of the stuff is pretty much the kind of stuff I said before. So I think that's all I'm going to cover for tonight. So I thought it gave some pretty good advice in general. Although there were some bits of misinformation, it definitely did a lot better than the general internet would probably do. So overall, I have to give huge props to the chatbot for being able to give mostly rational information. I think that's pretty cool. I'm sure I probably would miss some stuff, but that's where you guys can try it and see if it does anything interesting for you. And again, if it does anything interesting, feel free to let us know down in the comments. Otherwise, I believe that's going to be it for today. So if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to let me know. I'll try to get to you as soon as possible. Otherwise, yeah, I think that's it. So thanks for watching and have a good one. Peace.